Kia ora, kia ora.
Hello. Welcome.
Welcome to another awesome session. The link's just gone out, so we'll have a few more people coming on. But yeah, welcome for those that are already on here. And yeah, fire away, and we'll do our best to answer again. And yeah.
All right. Who's here? Any questions? Hi, Alan, and hi, Daniel and Nicole.
Oh, all the way from US.
Yes.
Nice.
They're working in India. Cool.
Cool. Oh, that sounds exciting. Maybe whilst we wait for questions, we'll go through the ones that have been put through by people that can't make it. So let's begin with a question from Gonzalo.
Hey, Gonzalo, ¿cómo estás?
So he's out in Brazil.
Portugal.
Portugal. And his questions are, what's your take on hybrid seeds? I'm looking into cocksfoot amber, sundergrass, piper, and black oats, Partex. As far as I can tell, they're not GMO, but the marketing talk is all very agricultural, and I'm wondering, where's the catch? Is there any scenario where you would let... Oh, that's the second question. So we get that one first.
So if you're certified organic, you can't use hybrids unless there's nothing else available. So if you're certified organic, that's that. And they are, of course, a cul-de-sac. That means you can't reuse your own seeds, which, especially in the case of Sudan grass, is quite expensive. Plus, you only get them treated. That's on top of being a hybrid. And then there are also hybrids of hybrids. So Sudan sorghum is a hybrid, just like corn is a hybrid between teosinte and some other grass. And bananas are a hybrid between different banana species. So there is that. But on top of that, just like a maize, a corn can be hybrid on top of being a natural hybrid. It's like a doubling of a hybrid. That means you have to buy those seeds again if you have a hybrid corn or the hybrid Sudan sorghum. And therefore they have a pattern that they can make expensive. So the other thing is it a food crop or not? If it's a food crop, I would try to stay away from hybrids because according to some quality test, the nutritious quality of a hybrid is lower than an open pollinated variety. And therefore I wouldn't advise that. But in cases like the Sudan grass, it's the only thing available, and it has a phenomenal growth rate, and so we use it. There are other hybrids that are natural that we use. For instance, our Teutonia is a natural hybrid. It's sterile. We can only grow it from cuttings. Our flame trees are sort of natural hybrids that don't make seeds, but therefore they put more emphasis on their growth rate. And that's what we want for these guys. We just want the mulch from them. We're not going to eat them. So yeah, comfrey is a natural hybrid. And there's not much we can do about it. And it's actually quite handy. But when you talk about black oats, I don't see there's any need really for going for a hybrid. It would be just unnecessarily expensive. Even so you don't eat them, I don't think there's any point of doing that. So yeah, in any food crop, say for instance broccoli, you can get as a hybrid, and yes, they make a nicer head and they might grow fast and so on, but you could also say they put more water on quicker. So I would stay away from hybrid vegetables and sweet corns and so on, but if it's for green manures, I think it's not a bad thing really, and often the only thing you can get. So I hope that answers your question. Was there any other seed that was particularly mentioned? No, I think it was oats and Sudan grass, black oats. Cocksfoot. Yeah, so cocksfoot if you do have a hybrid or you want to go there, you're not eating it yourself, but your livestock eats it. Is the nutritional quality the same as a non-hybrid? I don't know. Sometimes hybrids only perform well if they get the whole pampering that they do get on a conventional farm, irrigation, fertilization, and fungicides and whatnot. And if they don't get that, then they often don't compete so much better against the native cocksfoot that you would have in your area as well. I'm totally sure that you would have cocksfoot in some hedgerows that you could pick at the right time of the year. For you, that's another half a year. Here at the moment, we can collect and should collect our own cocksfoot right now, Southern Hemisphere.
Cool. So we'll answer those questions that have come in for at the end if we have time.
Yeah, all right, let's go.
With everyone that's on here.
It's filling up.
Cool. So first up, we've got Alan, of course. Always lovely to see
Alan.
you here. So your question is, so you had one about the spacing of the tree rows in the food forest video that we put a few weeks ago. They seem so close together. Can you talk through your reasoning and how you would harvest? So yeah, they are quite close. So maybe I'll speak to this.
Yeah.
So it's a food forest that I designed for my partner's place in Carmel. He's on the edge there. So the main intention and the main purpose of that food forest was a community-driven project to create food resiliency for that community there, for the whānau there. So it was about maximizing the amount of produce in that space. It wasn't intentional for like a commercial setting or trying to make harvesting streamlined in the way that you would want to design if you're doing bigger systems, or if income and commercializing it was your intention. So that's where the density really came in and the diversity. So when we speak to the fact that we have 750 different plants in there, we're talking about a selection of a few of those per that area. So it's not all the rows have avocados and not all the rows have bananas and so on. They're all fitted and stacked so that they all have the right spacing from one another and can fit densely because of that diversity that we have. And because our intention with harvesting is hand picking and being a part of it, very hands-on and just picking as a community off that space rather than trying to get some sort of harvester or any, what are they, those avocado harvester? Hydrolators or anything like that. That's not really what we've designed into that space. So yeah, Alan, I imagine with your intentions of wanting to commercialize more your production line, it is too dense for that purpose. So I can totally see where you're coming from that. But in the sense of it just being a nice 200 square meter seed block for the community to then have a diversity of food coming from that space, to then have the seeds to then extend and propagate out from that, as well as to just be able to engage with it and have the abundance that it offers come through it. But yeah, that would be my reasoning for that. And so the spacings so the beds are about 1.5 meters apart, and the trees are sort of positioned so we're not only taking account how the trees are laid out in strata vertically, but also how they correspond to the rows. So for example, if you've got 2 avocados, like the tips of my fingers are 2 avocados in one row, the next row would be in the middle there, so that they're not conflicting right next to each other. So yeah, if anyone's familiar with biointensive planting, similar approach to that, but with the trees. So that's a good way of being able to fit the right density because you're aware of the different canopy occupation of those different stratas, and you can get away with that density, obviously with making use of heavy pruning and keeping all the stratas in line that way as well. But we'll see how it evolves and how it goes on from there. But yeah, very hands-on. Yeah. For you, in terms of the spacing that you would maybe want for you, you would want to maybe think of having 3 rows between that maybe for the first few years before your avocado trees need that intensive harvesting, that you have your biomass plants or other crop plants in that you can phase out by the time that your avocados are producing, so that you can get those hydro ladders through there to make it worthwhile for you, and then just intensify the biodiversity within the actual rows of the avocado rather than between the rows of the avocados. Yeah. Is there anything you want to?
Yeah, on that note, I mean, the hydro ladder is what people normally look into when they do avocados. But I would personally, if I had an avocado orchard, I would just keep them lower, so you don't need a hydro ladder, and rather get an orchard ladder. That means you can have them closer together, and you don't have the compaction of the hydro ladder running through it at the time when it's actually quite moist still, which is normal, and it leads to Phytophthora, even on volcanic soil and sandy soil. And then when you have your rows closer together, but not quite as close together as in Sean's place, then don't forget the arrangement of one line with medium and emergent, and another line with the low and high strata to fit together. And therefore, even though the rows are fairly close together, they still fit nicer together than if you have all 4 strata in every row that you have with the distance. That is an advice that Namaste came up with, and I think it's very, very useful.
I'm going to speak up a bit.
Yeah. Sorry. Yeah.
Just so one little technical side note. These dots here indicate how loud you are.
Yeah. Cool.
Cool. So next question is from Nikki. Welcome. So you're asking, what do we recommend for starting a food forest patch? Should we till or start with a no-till method of adding to the soil in place? Well, it really depends whether you've got the labor or the time investment. So if you have a lot of time and you're not in a rush to evolve in that space into a food forest, then you can have a bit more of a minimal impact on the soil disturbance by just using a careful sort of succession of plants in that space, where you might let the first 18 months be just a diversity of pioneer plants to really break up that soil, outshade any weeds, and then interplant into that your crop plants. So you're slowly moving up, well, still faster, you're still fast tracking succession, but yeah, much slower fast tracking through those succession phases naturally. Or if you have a smaller area, or you want to get to a certain stage faster and you have the labor and the resources, then there's nothing wrong necessarily with coming and doing an initial soil disturbance and adding those amendments to kickstart that food forest. It's very common and a common practice in Syntropy to do that in the first year. You do come in and you can double dig and you add in your soil amendments or your compost or anything, because it is your one chance to get things below ground. So like your biochar or whatnot, it is your one chance to actually get that underneath your trees. So if you've got the area, if you've got the resources, the labor, you can kickstart your system like that. And that's what we did at the food forest in Kamo as well. We had a digger on hand, that we had an uncle that could drive it and had one. So we basically scraped back some of the kikuyu there and double dug that with the digger, incorporated scoria and compost into that space, and then planted a density of plants there to really occupy that space and fill out and outshade any re-emerging kikuyu that might come into that space. So it was a very successful way of intensively coming into that space, kickstarting it to then have a no soil disturbance approach from then on, where we're then just chopping and dropping and not digging up anything or ripping anything out. But yeah, obviously a bit more resource and labor heavy, and you are disturbing the soil and the certain soil profiles as well. So there is certain consequences down the track in terms of creating a drier soil, and creating a false sense of illusion for some plants, especially if you create a certain condition for plants by creating double digging and incorporating compost, and then you plant your abundant loving plants in that space that can handle and love that compost fluffy environment. But then if you don't plant in your pioneer still, if you're not taking into account that you're still in a accumulative phase, or if your soil is still quite poor underneath, if you're not taking account for that by planting in pioneer still, then you'll have this sort of false sense of illusion, a glory year, a few years of abundance, and then suddenly you'll see that your plants are starting to struggle because the roots are starting to hit against the sides of that area that you dug into. So yeah, by all means, dig into it, incorporate that soil amendment, but just be aware that that is what you're doing. You're fast tracking that phase, and to still come in with your pioneer plants into that space so that they can create and open up those soil channels below where you can dig, so that by the time your trees have outgrown that space, they've got all those root channels and stuff to tap into, and you can further create that success of that food forest. Yeah. Anything else you want to?
No, that was good. But just, as you started, it all depends. So when we started, after taking some trees down on top of the hill, which was Tasmanian blackwood and gum that were about 20, 30 years old, I was going to make a nice trench because I had the compost and everything. But then as I started digging, I just noticed how beautiful that mull was, this dense root network and all the semi-composted litter and so on, that it just felt criminal to dig and fluff that and dry it out and kill that life that was happening there already. So what I decided then instead was putting some contour logs in from the trees we felled, and then just fill it up rather than digging. We had the compost and the area was fairly small, so we just filled it up with compost, maybe 5 centimeters. And that gave us the opportunity to put some potatoes in together with the grasses, together with the titania, which then would take over and carry on with that. But it gives us the first crop of an annual riding on that wave. And it brings in these extra nutrients. I mean, there's just no doubt about it. Of course it does. But if you talk about a huge area and compost is dear and has to be transported long distances, you can do it without compost. You can do it without digging. You can do it into standing renkai kuyu, but then you have to use certain plants that can handle it. And it will always be slower than putting a good disturbance and some amendments. You can fast track it if you have the resources and the time to do that. So yeah, it depends on what you have available, the size, the dedication, you have the time, all of those things. It is a sliding scale, and and you can make a mix mash of that and see what works best. So you do one bait at a time and see what works out best for you and what you can afford and have the time to do.
And the other consideration as well is if you are on a slope, that it's quite tempting to come in and do terraces. So you're cutting into that topsoil and down and creating these flat terraces, which in the long term will create more potential for moisture and nutrients to settle on those flat areas and actually filtrate into the soil rather than run off. But what you may find is by cutting into that slope that way, you're actually cutting into the natural capillary action that happens in the soil, in the topsoil. So we often think of moisture of running always downhill, but also a lot of moisture gets wicked up the hill, and that's why it's really important to have water bodies in your valley and in your lowlands, because all that water will actually back up, and then capillary action will actually draw that water up the slope. So then when you come in and actually dig into that hillside, you're actually breaking up that natural flow of water going upwards and drying out your land a little bit more. So there is that trade-off. Over the years, it'll settle in and those natural systems will readjust. But in those crucial first few years, 1 to 5 years, you'll find that things will dry out a lot more, and you'll have possibly more reliance on irrigation and things like that. So just another consideration on the topography of your land as well, what method you approach, whether it's a bit more of a hands-off, let the plants do things in a nice tight succession, or coming in with amendments and labor.
Yeah, I think all those things do help, but the more you do to a site artificially in some ways or another, the more I feel you're losing touch with what actually wants to work on that site. And that's ever so important, because after a while, all these things that you do, they wear off. They only have a certain lifespan of helping you, and then you go back to the bones. And the more crutches you use, the more amendments, the more earthworks and that you do, the more you lose touch with what actually wants to work by itself. I think that is kind of what I get to understand more and more. And I hear other people in the permaculture world sort of mentioning similar things. So yeah, sometimes we get carried away with doing too much, and we actually get too far away from what is actually really making sense on the place. But we were actually talking about, we should make a video about the disturbance angle and different disturbances, how often, or yeah, I think we might do a bit of a lecture video on that one. So thanks for the reminder.
Awesome. And Susie, you've got a question. What is the best way to chop fowl and cardoon? Also, do you have any advice for paddocks with carrot weed and cow parsley taking over grazing? Thanks.
That video hasn't gone up yet, where we butchered the cardoon?
Not the cardoon.
No, okay. There's one coming soon.
Here you go. Oh.
Yeah, both fowl and cardoon, they're just a real nice sort of training plants for using a machete in a fairly easy way. And the machete is, I would say, is by far the fastest tool for both. I mean, the fowl or the cardoon are not very delicate. They're not crop plants. So if you make a few pruning mistakes because you're a bit too fast with the machete, it's nothing. So there are certainly plants that can be maintained with machete the easiest way. If you feel uneasy about it, I mean, fowl can almost be done with a sickle, with a garden shark. A cardoon, if it's the full-grown stalk, can be quite hard. You would need a pruning saw if you're afraid of a machete. All the leaves, if you have animals, especially goats, should be pulled off and used as fodder. They're fantastic fodder. Animals really like it. And the stalks then cut up and put parallel on the ground. And then for the cow parsley and the carrot weed, we are probably bad experts on that one. I keep hearing biodynamic people saying that they had great success with peppering. So if you want to look into biodynamic peppering, where you take the seeds and burn them at certain constellations and then sprinkle them out at another constellation, that makes sense. Look into that. You will find stuff on the internet. I've not done it myself. And we do have a lot of carrot weed, and it's annoying, but well, you just live with it. I mean, if you would do better pasture management, it might shift the balance. I think I talked about that before in Q&As. Probably a regular application of seaweed foliar could already make a difference, or certain mineral balances, if they are addressed, could help, but we are ourselves a bit behind on that. But you might find information on that in the biological farming world. The Lucro won't be here tonight, picking up a pizza oven. Hey, sorry guys, I haven't sent you the Sudan and the oats seeds yet. We haven't been to town. I will try it tomorrow.
They
are here.
Yay.
Oh, okay. But let's go to the next one here.
We'll put you. So Alan.
I was going to say, enjoy the pizza in the meantime.
Oh yeah. Well, they're picking up the pizza. Alvin. Maybe with pizza in it. Who knows? Now I'm getting hungry. Anyway, Alan. You've got quite a bit of a philosophical question here. Let's try and keep this short and precise.
More economic.
We might get all night on this one, so I'll just have to try and keep this short. Would you mind talking about your journey to making a living doing what you guys do now, and any challenges, learning and ideas along the way over the years? Whew. So the main, I guess income-wise, we used to be more 50-50, 50 teaching, 50% of our produce. And that's more down to the fact that because we live a part of a community, we have a very restricted amount of land that we can use to really propagate and commercialize some of our crops. And the main area of land that we do have as part of the community, which is the 2 acres around our house, from settling to now, it's really been Klaus's big experiment, really figuring out which plants grow well together and how to best deal with situations. So even though a lot of our knowledge and practices and principles can easily be funneled into a commercial line and actually generate income purely from the produce, our biggest, I guess, strength and asset in how we do things, given the restriction of land that we have, is actually stepping more into the research side and education because of those restrictions and because of the expansive knowledge that we have over the different countries as well. So we have specified more into research rather than commercializing our crops. That said, we obviously do sell a lot of our produce, both from our market garden and from the food forest, but it's not necessarily our emphasis. Our emphasis is on research, figuring out what works, what can be put together in different spaces and different climates and different soils for people to help more people either create income off the land or to provide their own food. But overarching all of that, our biggest philosophy is really including people onto the land and creating more of a harmonious relationship with the land rather than over commercializing something. So as much as we're really tempted to somehow someday be able to be involved or purchase or be involved in a larger area of land where we can really apply and synthesize a lot of our knowledge into more of a streamlined commercial setting, much of what they do in Australia and are starting to do more and more in New Zealand, it's still, we always just come back to actually what is the bigger picture of what else, do we incorporate into our lifestyle, not just the syntropy side, but the whole permaculture way of living, all the different elements that we have, the different holistic animal integration, the biochar, the electric vehicles. It's all one big lifestyle that is about minimizing our footprint and maximizing our handprint in all different areas, taking responsibility of all different areas of what it takes to live. So yeah, that's sort of our general approach and why we are leaning more towards research and education, because we find that is our greatest strength, that we can contribute to the world, and we still gain a lot of credibility from our community and from the methods that we use based on the produce that it does produce and the health of that produce and the plants based on the principles that we use, which then people can take that knowledge and those experiences and that research that we've done and streamline that into a specific, more maybe syntropy based commercial farms, and that's awesome as well. So yeah, that's probably my rundown on where we are in terms of creating finances from the space. It's sort of centered around that. Is there anything you want to add to that?
Since it's about a journey, I probably talked about it already. My personal journey with that, since we got here to New Zealand, and I put a lot of time in experimenting stuff that didn't immediately make money, but I was lucky to have employment with a polytech, and I was teaching stuff I wanted to teach, permaculture related. And at the same time, I learned stuff about horticulture that I didn't actually know yet. And so that helped me quickly adapting to the conditions here. And And meanwhile, apart from the teaching job, which luckily wasn't always 100% of my time, I was able to start developing the food forest, and anything I could sell, I would sell, be that banana pups, be that seeds of stuff that I collected, stuff selling on the market as we did as a family. So normally when you look at the classic marketing, is like first you analyze your market and then you grow for the market. We never have done it that way around. We have always done it the other way around. We have always imagined that something we wanted to grow will find a market, and so far that has never disappointed us, actually, the attitude. And when I lost my job because the program was closed, it was just a perfect moment because I had enough of it. Now, a lot of people come to permaculture and want to quit their job and just want to live off permaculture, and it can be incredibly hard. And I would advise people to actually stick to what they're good at, that is not permaculture, because usually other things make more money than permaculture for quite a while. Stick to that as long as you need it to support your establishment phase and so on, and try to get a 4-day work, 3-day work for the stuff where you make more money than with primary production. And then, I mean, living off primary production is already hard in any case, but in permaculture, there's less specialization, there's more handwork, higher diversity, direct marketing, which has its own challenges. You have to accept that your hourly rate is pretty low. And you're normally talking about, if you're lucky, about minimum wage. However, you're your own boss, you have a beautiful work environment and no dull moment. And you build up a bit of a lifeboat for you and your family at the same time. But then try to find activities that make more than the minimum wage, unless you really subscribe to what we have done, to a frugal hedonism, or what we now call, now that we feel like we are going more into an abundance phase, we actually like to call it a regenerative hedonism, where you live a good life because your food is fantastic and you have a great living environment, but you don't have any spare cash to go on holidays and knickknacks like that. So if you trade that off, you have already a lot of freedom to earn less. And there's this joke in permaculture that you can only live off permaculture if you teach it. So I'm sure some people look at us that way. Oh yeah, they have to do Patreon, otherwise they can't live off their stuff. And the thing is, we actually love to teach. It's one of our professions or our trades. We have done it long enough, and we feel we enjoy it, and we have good feedback. And if I wouldn't be able to teach permaculture, then maybe I would want to be an archery teacher or something. I love teaching, and at the same time, I love doing food forests, and I would do it no matter the cost. It's just something I couldn't stop doing. But luckily, we can combine it all to have a good life, and a frugal life, but a good life. So I encourage anyone else to jump onto that, but not forget their trade and still do that. Work from home on the computer, do trade me trades, or whatever you can come up with that you do aside of your food forest as training wheels until your food forest is so productive that you feel like you live off that, or you don't need more than that. Or you continue with your side incomes, whatever that takes, and work as a family where you have maybe different income streams together, and your farm is subsidized by everyone having some other income, but you want to do that because that's how you want to see your land being alive and feeding you. And there's nothing wrong with that. We don't have to always think that we have to make an income just from farming. I think that's nuts. Never been the case in human history for most of the time. We always had some other trade, whatever that might be.
And I think that sort of diversity is what's really welcoming and inspiring as the second generation helping establish and coming into a farm like this, that it's always been open, it's always been about the people and then the environment sort of fitting around that rather than fitting into a certain farm or certain income crop or anything like that. It's really been about what are you interested in, what are your skills, what are your passions, and how to contribute that as a family to create that organic and diverse income streams. So yeah, in terms of bringing the second generation in, or expanding, or pulling together different families, it is really beautiful coming together like that and having that diversity. As challenging as that is in its diversity, it's also what makes it really fun and interesting and inspiring as well. But just a quick note on if anyone is wanting to really go a bit more commercial with Syntropy, there is some great examples out there, so it's definitely possible.
Yeah.
Obviously, in our Australia and New Zealand, where our labour costs are higher than, say, in Brazil, where they are able to get away with lower labour costs and therefore have more people be able to be involved in the food forest. In New Zealand, it is trickier. And a farm that I visited in Australia by Scott Hall, his specification was on how to compete with commercial food productions in a Syntropy way. And his big driving principle was any plants that you choose in your consortium, so in your community of plants for that food forest, you do the market research, either the potential of that market or the existing market, and you choose plants that really thrive and work well and have a certain output in that way. Whereas we've tended to focus more on the research side, so we are the ones that actually figure out what works and what doesn't, so that then people can actually streamline that into a certain system. So yeah, it's definitely possible. You just have to be a little bit more on the game as to what's out there, what the demand is, really calculate the effort that you're putting into that plant, the money that you're purchasing those plants, if that's the case, what is the outcome, what is the profit and all that return. So it's possible.
Yeah. No, it is definitely possible, Alan, and so don't get me wrong. I mean, you don't have to forever stay in hospitality. But yeah, at the same time, we all have to do still a learning curve with all of that until it actually throws money at us. And so don't have any illusions about it. It's a bit a hard pass, especially in Syntropy. It's not easy to find people that you can employ to do Syntropy for you. It's really hard. So ideally, you get into what we're looking for now is interns, people that you can train up that work for you a few months, so you can actually train them up and they want to learn that, and so have help like that. But to employ people to help you in a syntropic food forest can be probably a bit tricky, I imagine. I remember Ernst in Brazil, it took him a lot of selecting to find laborers that would take to it and be good at it. There's certainly that bottleneck, and I think that's the reason why monocultures started to dominate the world as a basis for civilizations and not Syntropy. It was much easier to dig people around working for you in a monoculture than get them to understand voluntarily. You cannot force somebody to understand and get passionate about Syntropy. Let's put it that way, no matter how you crack the whip over them. So maybe that's the biggest stumbling block in Syntropy. It takes passion for doing that.
But also another inspiring video to possibly have is conversations under the story. I think it's what we're doing now. So yeah, we'll keep that in mind. I think income and creating money off the system is a reoccurring question that we have. So yeah,
and then there's so much more than money in it.
Yeah. But yeah, I'll jot that down as another good video idea. Cool. And then Daniel, so you're from the US. Nicole, how do you repurpose an old mixed oak and pine forest in a temperate environment? Should we heavily thin the canopy, then add hedgerows of shade-tolerant food and forage-bearing plants on contour?
Righty. Mixed oak and pine, it sounds like a natural pine forest for a change. That's interesting. Now the problem with pines is they don't take easy to pruning when it comes to the top, right? Whereas the oaks can be copies, so the oaks are an easy one. So if you want to crack into that to open up space for crops in there or other helper plants, but you might still want to use those trees, or depending how old these ones are. If the pines are too old, maybe it's not so nice. So I would maybe harvest the older pines if it's a mixed stand and use them if they're usable already for poles. But the younger ones, they would still be far away from senescence and have enough young drive, and then just lift the crown by pruning them up, as you do for timber pines here in New Zealand. And the oaks, you could do the same, or since they can handle it, you can coppice them right ground level and let them come up again. And that means you have suddenly a lot of light coming in. And now you can come in filling the light wells, filling the gaps with plants that are cropping for you. I don't know what the oaks can bring to you. The oaks can bring to you. I mean, maybe they're good for certain acorns, and you could think of having picks there seasonally. But otherwise, if you want other crops in there, of course, for instance, say blueberries, yeah. So there would be a moment, that opening, that you put in the blueberries, and at the same time in that opening, you will have a lot of mulch suddenly, a lot of extra light. And if you do that in spring, then that's one of those moments where you can put in a crop of potatoes, because it probably will also be rather acidic and very mullish soil, which potatoes will like. At the same time, you can put in some Jerusalem artichoke to be your friend for a couple of years and give you some marginal crop. And at the same time, you can put in apple trees. You can put in silverberries as an evergreen nitrogen-fixing berry crop. So all of those things can go in at that moment of this big reset, right? So you come in with a big disturbance, but you have to understand which plant can handle what type of disturbance. So the oak is okay with the coppice and actually can quite thrive on it. And the pine cannot handle that. So you have to decide on which pines you want to take out, like the ones too old or crooked or too many, whatever. But the ones you leave, you clean up. And since you might not be in that moment interested in the timber production of them, you're not worried about harming their growth curve. So you can really prune them hard and leave only a V-tip so they don't die, but then they come back with full force. But you want that extra light, you want all that mulch that they produce, because that's your moment of re-jumping that system. And you won't do that again and again and again. You might do that only once, and then all comes back together, and then you do your normal prunings, but never again to such a degree. And then, of course, the next year round, you won't have annuals anymore, but you would have some perennials that can handle the then increasing shade again, like the blueberries and the silverberries, and whatever needs more sun has to stay up with the rest, like elderberries and pears and apples and hazelnuts and whatever else you can bring into that situation. I don't know your climate and soil, but yeah, you have to pick and choose what will do well in that companionship. And at some point you might think that the pines are not the greatest companion, and you slowly phase them out. As soon as they make a bit of a round timber that's useful for something, take them out, harvest them, or get rid of them all right away. It's totally up to you. But I think pines are actually pretty good drivers of a system, as long as you keep the younger one in the new system and you prune them up. I think they can be quite interesting. I haven't done it myself, but I'm confident that they have their place too. But their prunability is not the same as the oak, so you might want to shift the balance at least.
Cool. And so Cam and Nikki, you are here, and your question is, How do you
I
incorporate?
think we missed one here. Daniel and Nicole.
Oh, sorry, I did too. Daniel and Nicole. He knows us well already. I know it depends. But could you guess how many square feet of young syntropic rows can one person set back per hour or 8-hour workday?
So should we start with depends then?
No, it wouldn't be you if you didn't.
Well, what does it depend on?
The person, what else he's doing,
It's a square.
experience,
Mm-hmm.
his physique or her physique,
Yeah.
or what environment, what soil, what you're growing, what climate, what seasons you've got going on.
And the age of the
And the
syntropy
age.
rows.
And the age of the syntropy rows,
Yeah.
age of the person.
Yeah. So the age of the syntropy rows, for instance, is an interesting one. Initially, it's a lot more work, and it's backbending work for the first year, which is annoying. And I find that I cannot do more than an hour a day with a year-old food forest, and then I had enough for my back, and I moved to food forest that give me the chance to stand upright and do some machete magic, and maybe even go up a ladder and swing around in the crown and lop off some branches. I have no trouble with that with my back, but bending down, it's not good for me. So that's how much it depends on the person and the age of the food forest. And then, say for instance, the first year is a lot of sickle work, and if you're new to the system and you have to constantly sync with every plant, now what am I going to do here? It will slow you down. So it depends on how much you get into the zone of being practically on autopilot whilst you listen to some really interesting podcast. You go in and let your fingers do the thinking, and you're fast with the sickle. Like we once had a woofer from Nepal. My God, he was just a champion on the sickle, and you couldn't see the sickle anymore, so fast he was. And he knew what to do and what to cut and how to cut it and how to drop it somewhere where you need it, and so on and so on. So yeah, it depends on how handy you are with tools, how much you experience this, and so on. Do you want to say something?
Well, I'm guessing because you know that it depends. Your main question before we go into all of what it depends on is trying to get an idea, a sort of ballpark as to what sort of labor you're looking at in a syntropic system. So, in a general sense, could you give, like you often say, it would take one person could manage 5 acres of a food forest if that was all they did. That sort of generalized answer. Could you? Yeah, is that possible?
Right? Okay. So if I take myself as an example, I'm sort of getting lazy as I get older. And over the last days, I did a few food forest rows that were about between a year and 2 years old. So they're reasonably high on the grasses, and a few things on ground level. I had to go on my knees, use a sickle mostly. Once in a while, take the machete to cut some wattle branches up and so on. So I would say our rows down in the market garden, they are 22 meters long. And it probably takes me, I would say, if I'm not taking a break, I can do one of those rows in an hour and a half, maybe. Yeah. Yeah, probably an hour even. Yeah. So there would be 22 square meters in an hour. And at the moment, in their sort of age, we need to repeat it every 4 months, maybe.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, about every 4 months. Obviously, in the seasons that changes, but yeah. And then in the food forest, we should go through twice a year, but we end up going through the whole thing probably about once a year.
Yeah.
And that's a 2 acre food forest that we go through the whole thing once a year. But yeah. Ballpark thing that you always say is, one person, average age, average physique, all that, 5 acres of a streamlined, average, soiled food forest.
Yeah.
Hope that helps without all the depends. But yeah, again, just calculating all the other 8 forms of capital that we get from working in that way.
Yep.
So as helpful as it is to strategize.
For generations to come, future generations using the same piece of land will have it a lot easier.
Yeah,
we're just trying to become good ancestors here.
So yeah, hi, Nikki and Cam. How do you incorporate pumpkins into a food forest? Mainly, it would be in the first year. So it would be your seedling food forest that you could then, as an understory annual plant, you could have pumpkins covering that ground. Or in later stages of the food forest, if for whatever reason you feel like you want to do quite a drastic reset, whether it's because you've got some sort of fungal infection there, or because you're not dense enough, or there was a big storm and you already had a bit of chaos and you want to go with that. Whatever the reason is, you want to do a big reset and you have got that light well availability again. You can come in again with your pumpkins or any other annuals, corn, potatoes. We've done that in a few areas of the food forest here, that we've done a massive reset because of an armillaria fungus sort of infestation. So we did a massive reset, and then we came in and planted a whole load of other trees that were a bit more resistant to it. And whilst we were in that phase of having more light there, we also planted a whole load of potatoes. So in the same way, you could plant pumpkins that way. Otherwise, in terms of the succession of the forest, it would be in the first year. Unless, again, you're integrating like a market garden with your food forest and you have your rows spaced out enough. The average is about 5 meters apart. And then you have a few annual rows in between that. And that would be crucial then, that you're facing north-south with your rows. And then in between you have your annual beds that still have enough light during the day. So that's a way that you could keep the annuals going in an integrated system. Yeah. Any other?
The interesting thing about pumpkins is, and that's how I used them extensively up this year in the new clearing up on top of the hill, which I managed with these rows, with grass rows we showed in earlier videos. And there are some special holes that we made for sugarcane or for certain trees, where a lot of goodies went into sort of individual holes that are standing out with fertility. I mean, shit happens, has to go somewhere. And the nice thing about a pumpkin is it likes a very rich soil. It's not one of those pioneer plants, unless you use a pine melon, that might be the most on that side. But the nice thing about a pumpkin is it can explore these really rich places, but then look for light somewhere else. So you have a whole guild that you put into those rich holes, be that the sugar cane and maybe a banana or something or another, that you put in these very generous filled up planting holes where your biochar goes and compost and whatever. But then they all sort of compete for light. That's the only limiting factor in the whole situation, is the light is the limit. We want to harness most of that, all of it. But the pumpkin draws from that hole, but takes the light from somewhere else, where you only have some grass or something that you didn't address yet. And that's the nice thing about pumpkins, that they do that. So I think they have a really good place in it. Of course, they make management a bit difficult once the vines run everywhere and you can't step on them without ruining them. Of course, forget about mowing in between them, if that was your plan, unless you constantly want to move the vines somewhere out of the way. But if you're not mowing, if you're on a steep hill or something like that, you're not having a machine, you don't use a weed eater, then I think they are must-have, just because they explore the extra sunlight that otherwise gets fairly unused somewhere else.
And on that note, once your window of having those annuals, those pumpkins in that system goes, integrating other plants that occupy that same sort of niche and provide this similar food source, which could be your pie melon. I don't know what the scientific name for that is.
Pie melon?
Yeah.
Cucurbita ficifolia.
Say that a bit louder so I don't have to repeat that.
Cucurbita ficifolia. So cucurbita is the genus of all the pumpkins, and ficifolia means, I think it means like the shape of a fig leaf. and that is the hardy one that looks like a watermelon, but it's not. And but it grows like a beet, and
but still easy to manage. So
yeah,
not
yeah,
too invasive. But yeah, it's a nice perennial, climbs up your food forest, so you do have to manage it a bit. But yeah, prolific producer of really, really big sort of pumpkin-y melons that is like a spaghetti squash, or if you get them younger, they're like a winter zucchini. So yeah, it's all about integrating these other sort of perennial crops into that space as well, that fit a similar niche of outsourcing resources and like
no, it's from South America, but it's sort of from a Mediterranean / subtropical climate. As long as you don't have frost, they grow into a few years. They're sort of a bit perennial.
Nice, Nikki. Abbreviating our question. Short version: yes, you can till, but do go with the succession method for the best chance of a long-term success. Yeah, that's basically that in a nutshell. Thanks. And vigilant yacht characters. You guys sound mighty interesting, apparently, in Russell. Your question is, can you suggest some ground cover crops to plant in winter? At the moment, I have wood chip covering soil and a 1-year-old food forest. So ground cover crops, I guess, in a food forest.
So if your food forest is already 1 year old and you want to now implement the ground cover, unless your food forest is a bit sparse, that would be a bit challenging. You would need something that can take a bit of a shade then. In that case, it would be plantain, cocksfoot.
Crop plants.
So it was green cover crop.
Oh, cover crops.
Chicory could still make it in a bit of shade. And red clover can do a bit of shade as well. But otherwise, if that's not the case, if you have a bit more light, then black oats or white oats. Just a quick word on black oats. They are meant to be better, deeper roots and everything than white oats, but they were also meant to have less rust as the white oats. I'm not sure how much less rust they get here. I was a bit disappointed on that side. But yeah, black oats, white oats, and chicory, definitely. I think chicory is an absolute must. It's such a fantastic ground cover.
And yes, he
anything
said
I forgot
it's
about?
sparse. And yes, he confirmed that it was
sparse. Oh, it's sparse, yeah. Well, if there's enough light, then put some oats in the light areas, but oats really hate it if it's already a bit shady, as most grasses do, except for things like cocksfoot and a few others.
Yeah, plantain would probably be a really good one for
and then I can't get over how beautiful Job's tears work as a ground cover grass, and you and Russell would be frost-free enough to have it. If it's moist enough, it needs moisture. It really hates it dry. But shady, not a problem. Wet, not a problem, as long as it's not too waterlogged. It doesn't like a swamp. But Job's tear is a fantastic plant, I must say. But yeah, cocksfoot, definitely. That's going to be your friend for a long time. Definitely go for the cocksfoot.
Awesome. Thanks for the feedback, Nikki. Incredibly grateful that you are sharing your knowledge. It is so valuable to me, and I'm sure many others.
Thank you.
It's awesome to hear. And Daniel and Nicole, you've got a question here. How do you deal with deer or other natural food forest predators? Well, thankfully we don't have deer.
I would love to bow hunt deer. Come on. Can I talk?
Yeah,
really
you're the hunter.
Okay, hopefully you're not vegans. Otherwise, just don't listen. But you see, the thing with the food forest is that it brings in wild animals of all sorts. So for us here, we have had a few massive invasions of wild pigs, and most of them found their way into our freezer. And we get possums coming in here. They're drawn to it like to a magnet because of either cherimoyas or inga beans being in ripe fruit, and they can smell it for kilometers. So we keep on drawing them out of the forest, and luckily we don't have too many in the forest. There's quite a good landcare group active, so we do get them, and yeah, we like to eat them, and it's really a good part of our diet, eating animals that come to the food forest. And when I was working with indigenous people in the Amazon, people that were big time into hunting game, but at the same time had their food forests in a similar way that we do, sort of a smorgasbord of different fruit trees ripening all the time. They didn't have to go far for hunting. They would just know which tree had fruit when and what animal would come to it, and then they would be waiting there, because that was much easier to hunt than running around in the bush looking for game. It's such a difference, especially if you only have a shotgun or bow and arrows. You're not just running around in the forest chasing deer and whatnot. You're actually waiting for it where it shows up to eat, and that's your food forest. So there's that. Otherwise, I don't know, if you had a dog, maybe you could train the dog to keep them away. I don't know. We don't have deer issues here. I know that's a harder one than what we deal with here. But I would put it on the list of permitted diet and see that as another crop in the system. As we say in permaculture, just change the attitude. You look at a problem as being a resource, and suddenly it appears in a different light. So I hope that helps, and just in case you haven't thought about it yet yourself. But that's our attitude to it.
So we've got our last 2 questions for the evening. Last one by you, Daniel and Nicole, and then we've got one last one on the comment section of our post by someone that can't be here either. So yeah, so your question again. So what are your thoughts on black locust and honey locust trees and their place in a syntropic system?
Cool. Now you're in the States where the black locust and honey locust is native. Black locust has been tried by a few people that I knew here in Northland because of the promise of having durable fence posts coming out of a coppice situation once you get into them. And so far, it seems to be quite disappointing. We haven't done it ourselves, but I've seen it in the neighborhood. They grow really slow on clay and quite sickly, and no straight growth coming from them, and don't seem to be worth the bother at all. Of course, it could be different on volcanic soil. It could be different on sand. But I'd say for New Zealand, they would be more interesting down in the south on gravel soils. But for you in the US, a whole different ballgame, I guess. Now, honey locust is interesting for us. It does grow all right on clay. It grows pretty fast on clay even. It's a beautiful emergent canopy for us. And the only thing is initially it suffers if it gets easily left behind and then just sort of sits there on standby and just doesn't move more than a centimeter a year sort of thing. So either you create light wells or you have rows that you dedicate to plants like that are a bit slower, that can't have too much competition for that emergent layer, something that you reset constantly in order to let the honey locust come up visit. But I think honey locust is an amazing plant. It's fantastic. However, it comes to it that you might not want to pick up the pods yourself to feed to your animal. So that means you can only use it in a silvopastoral situation where the animals actually come in winter to pick up the pods on the ground. Otherwise, you have to waste your own bag on picking them up and taking them to the animals, which is okay if your animals are your pets, but if it's meant to be an income, then you wouldn't want to do that. So keep that in mind. With the black locust, there is no such thing that animals eat. But yeah, I think both are interesting. Now, the black locust is a nitrogen fixer. As far as I know, there is the honey locust, despite being in the family of leguminous plants or Fabaceae, is known to not fix nitrogen, one of those irritating exceptions to the rule. Then, and the place in the syntropic system, well, somehow all leguminous trees more or less are an emergent layer and fairly pioneering. They need to be leading the race. One of the few exceptions in that is for us is the Brazilian buttercup shrub, which is a bit more of a subtropical one, can handle quite a bit of shade. And again, it's one of those plants that is an exception. It doesn't fix nitrogen. And that could be the key to understanding that, because the nitrogen fixation is what takes a lot of sun energy to perform. But since they don't do it anyway, might explain why they are a bit more happy to be in the shade than other legume trees. But then you should be able to say the same thing about honey locust, and it's not true again. They don't like to be in the shade. So here we go again. The world is full of exceptions to our rules that we try to put together.
Awesome. So Alan,
there was one on Airbnb still.
There was more comment.
There was a comment.
Yeah, it was a good comment.
Can we not comment on comments?
Absolutely. So class wants to comment on this comment, and that comment is, what did you say?
Mixing permaculture.
Oh yeah. So in regards to different alternative income streams of a permaculture farm, Daniel and Nicole wrote, mixing permaculture with agrotourism is worth considering. Brackets, Airbnb, tiny houses in your food forest, etc.
Totally. I don't think it's just worth considering. I think we might get in the future to a situation where people don't even want to consider going to your Airbnb unless you have a food forest where the kids can pick fruit whilst, why wouldn't you? I mean, come on, it should be standard. It's one of those situations, I would say, you're not trying to look for, are people actually asking for Airbnb that have a food forest? Are we waiting for that? Or are we going to do like, hey, of course we're going to have a food forest with Airbnb, because as soon as we offer it, people want it. You see what we explained earlier, you create your market. You don't wait for the market to ask you to have a food forest with your Airbnb. All right, so I'd say it's going to be standard. And so there's so many cabins you can hide under a food forest. It's unbelievable.
So this goes back to Alan's question about what challenges and ideas you've had over the years. So this is how it flows.
Yeah.
Mastermind over
Thank
here.
You.
And then Alan also, thanks for the close off there. That did go really quick, and you're welcome. And you also wrote, goodbye, everyone. We will go forth and try and be good ancestors.
Hang on a second. There's still a reply to our answer on the deer. And let's do that still. Okay, so Danielle Nicole said, our challenge is protecting young trees from heavy deer population, and we would love to harvest them. Okay, not vegans, that's good. Sorry, no, not I mean, just, but can't sit in a tree stand all day. Well, you could work in your food forest. No, okay. But I mean, there is that, and there could be certain deer repellents that you could put on your trees.
There's
And
certain urines, like my ex-partner in the States, they had a bit of deer issues coming into the garden, and they said urine was quite a big one for that. So whether you've got any animals or your own urine that you want to spray out around the periphery of your food forest, that could be something.
Yeah, I think my approach would be to come up with a foliar feed. I'm a great fan of foliar feed. It's something new in my life. I haven't been until recently, and I will definitely make a video on that. We thought about that already, because I'm quite passionate about that now. And so going out, putting something on trees that's just against deer is sort of a lot of work. However, if you actually make a foliar feed that's good for your whole food forest, and there's one component in there that pisses deer off, then we are having a sort of, dare I call it, gain of function, or stacking of functions in permaculture, we call it. And what that could be, I don't know. It could be maybe a chili pepper.
I think your fish fertilizer that you've just if I was a deer, I would to give context.
Yeah, that's right. You can't hear that at the moment through the microphone, but I just put some fish fertilizer out this evening, and the whole neighborhood is probably complaining about it. But yeah, so if you would have access to deer poo, for instance, I mean, no animal with any self-respect and choice would eat foliage of trees that were sprayed with its own dung, right? So that's something you could keep in mind for silvopasture systems. Before you let the cows in, you make sure that you spray some cow slurry on your tree rows, so they leave them in peace and just eat the grass next to it that hopefully didn't get the spray on them. Same goes for horses. When we have horses in paddocks where there are some trees, we know that they might take the bark off. What we do is we just grab a handful of horse shit and rub it on the tree, and done deal. But if you do it on a bigger scale and you put it in a backpack sprayer and spray it out there, give it a try and see what happens. Where you access deer poo, I don't know. But that could happen. And maybe it doesn't even have to be just deer poo. Maybe goat poo could help already, or sheep poo, or something similar. Why is that? Because these animals are clever enough to understand how parasites are transmitted, and therefore might not touch it. Give it a try, see what happens. And if it doesn't work, at least you haven't spent much money on it, and all your trees have benefited from a bit of fertilizer that went on the foliage like that. And you might stumble across a good recipe that works.
And then you could market it, and there's another income avenue for all the other deer pest food forests out there.
Yeah. So there's a lot of room for experimentation there. But I would definitely try to combine it, give it another function in terms of foliar spraying the whole lot that benefits from it then.
Cool. Anything else you want to speak to before we move to the last question?
We have a time. Let's see the last question, and maybe that triggers me on something else.
So our last question by Gonzalo, again from Portugal. Is there any scenario where you would let a tree planted on a syntropic row grow past the size you can comfortably fell without calling it a harvester? Calling in a harvester or an arborist, I imagine. So any scenario where you would let a tree planted on a syntropic row grow past the size you can comfortably fell without calling in an arborist.
Okay. Right. A situation I could imagine, for instance, if you have some really high value timber in there. Yeah. So for us, for instance, here in the upper part of New Zealand, an interesting timber tree could be a native, for instance, a koikoi, where we wouldn't expect the maturity before, say, 40 years. So you let them go. You're not going to prune the tip. You just let them go into timber, maybe prune the sides, of course, and so on. But then, say, after 40 years, when all your cohoes come to maturity and you want them as a native timber and see how that sells and what, and then you say, okay, the whole system gets rebooted with 40 years. Either you start from zero again, or you knock everything down and say your cherimoya, your macadamias can live, and your lucumas can live longer than 40 years, but they can also easily come back from a coppice or a pollard that you have surviving after knocking these high value trees down. Yeah, so there would be that. If they are high value enough, you might even get an arborist in to take the limbs off first and then fell the log to make less destruction if your system is too valuable to get trashed up like that. So there's that too, and you still get your valuable log out. Another interesting wood for us, for instance, could be the broadleaf red cedar from Australia, the Tuna australis. That could be an interesting timber tree for us. So again, you would think of a 30 to 40 year rotation, but the timber could be by that time so valuable that trashing your orchard in order to get them out is not an issue. And then you start with your potatoes and artichokes again and put bananas in again or whatever and drive it up again. And you might even have the odd survivor of a stump of a cherimoya and this and that, and you just take it and leave it going like that, you know. Because we're not doing slash and burn, you see, that is the huge difference to traditional resetting of food forests that our ancestors all over the world have done with fire, because they didn't have snazzy electric chainsaws and carbon steel machetes. They relied on ring barking and fire to do a reset because it made so much sense for them, and I can totally relate to that. But we don't have to repeat that because we have the tools now to do it differently, and so we can reset everything without killing everything. There's a huge difference when you do a reset with fire, because it's the only way you can economically do that, because you don't have the right tools for doing it otherwise. Then you kill every stump. Everything is toast, including a lot of your litter and some of the tops. I mean, the litter is gone as well often if you have a hot burn. But if we do a modern reset, we end up with 30 centimeters of mulch, and most of the stumps that we keep knee-high will resprout and 2 years later have fruit on them again. So if you have taken your timber out, as you do that, you leave all the branches behind. You might even have a portable sawmill that comes in, and you leave all the sawdust behind and the bark and the sapwood stuff. You leave all behind as mulch, and all you take out is a very lean pack of boards that have the highest value, and all the rest stays behind. That would be a beautiful reset. I would like to see that. And unfortunately, most food forests that we hear of, they're too young to actually go through that phase yet. But I'd say that Ernst Götzsch's food forest in Bahia, they would get to the point where he would do things like that now. And that must be a beauty to watch how these resets happen, where you take the timber out and at the same time you spread the seeds of a new annual crop and of a new rotation, but at the same time whatever wants to carry on can carry on and reboot. I think that would be a beautiful sight. I've seen it a bit in the Amazon where we knocked down second growths of very sparse, old, random food forests where there were some cocoa trees in there, either wild or planted before, and another few fruit trees. And there was the beauty of not burning in these resets, because suddenly, bang, they were back like that. And if you had burned it, that would be all gone to zero. There's a huge difference in that. Yo.
Cool.
I hope that answered that question a bit of a roundabout way. but yeah, that's when we would let the big trees grow beyond being manageable. Yeah.
Mm.
Don't eat with your ukes; they're not worth it.
Awesome. Cool. So that wraps up our February session. So yeah, thanks again for your awesome questions. Yeah, really awesome to see the variety and that there's always new questions for us. We always enjoy, as you I'm sure have gathered, explaining and answering and sharing our experiences with you. Yeah, super invigorating and reaffirming for us. So yeah, thanks for all you guys' support and enthusiasm, and yeah, go out and become better and ongoing ancestors. Ongoing better. Anyway.
All right. Thanks for your questions, guys, and yeah, always love getting in touch with you like that, and get a feeling for what you're working on, your projects that you are journeying through, and getting passionate about, and helping getting the land that you live with to live up to its full potential and feed you a good diet. I like to hear all of that. So good on you. Good luck with it.
Awesome. See you all next month.
Kaki there.
See ya.
Love the sunnies.
Blue blockers.